Welcome back to part 6 of our After Effects tutorials. My name is Arnold Faller, and today we would like to take a look at expressions and at simple expressions in After Effects. Expressions are little pieces of code or scripts that will allow you to automate or randomize certain things in After Effects. Let's get right into it. As soon as we try something, you will soon see what I'm talking about. Here's an example, by the way, that from the film Terminator, or I think it's visible in all films of Terminator, that the head-up display of the Terminator that produces random kind of data and text that are running around. Let me play that quickly. And you can see as the Terminator approaches the bar, you can see there's all kinds of weird data blended in. Sometimes the text is static, sometimes the text is also moving. Let me pick a point. In this part, it's basically text coming down. There's actually not a lot of counting text and times and so on. Let's go to a more recent example, and that would be from the movies the Iron Man, the head-up display of the Iron Man suit inside. So here's, I think, the first time that the Iron Man suit is shown. So Tony Stark closes the suit, booting the computer, and then you got all kinds of display here. So not only the graphic elements, but also all kinds of text elements running here. Very famous is the eye-like or the shutter-like graphics here in Iron Man, so the things in front of his eyes. We will do something like this later, so you can see that the bars running around and see these pieces, and also the pieces of text here. So let's have a look how we can use expressions to kind of randomize or automatically animate things like this in After Effects. So I'm going to start with a new composition. I don't need any background footage or so. I'm doing a new composition in HD, so 1920 by 1080, 25 frames per second, and a default length of 30 seconds. Okay, so let's start it and zoom in a bit. So the first first I would like to show you how to use expressions in After Effects, and therefore I'm gonna do a simple kind of graphic. It doesn't matter what you use, a piece of picture, a piece of graphic, and so on. Let's go for a simple let's take the simple rectangle as a shape tool. So here's a little rectangle as a shape layer. So this shape layer, I'm going to check out its rotation, for example. And you can see rotation, we know when we want to animate, first when we want to change the rotation, we do it with this rotation angle value here, reset. And if we want to animate rotation, we just click the stopwatch, and from then on we can create keyframes in animation. But to use an expression here for the rotation value, we have to Alt+Click. So you hold your Alt key and press the stopwatch, and that will open the expression. So from now on, the rotation is no longer influenced by whatever value we have or whatever the animated value we have, but some kind of expression. And the expression can be typed in over here. Right now it's just transform rotation. So instead of transform rotation, you can type all kinds of things there, for all kinds of expressions. Let's delete the transform rotation. And the first thing that I would like to start with is produce a random rotation angle with the command wiggle. And the command wiggle is you just type wiggle, and in brackets, so you use brackets, and in brackets you have to type the first value is the frequency, and the second one's the amplitude. For example, let's do 2, that is 2 times per second, so 2 hertz, actually 2 times per second, then comma, and then what value? And let's go for 90. 90 in this case stands for 90 degrees. So wiggle will produce 2 times per second a random value between 0 and 90. Okay, so that will leads when I now move my time slider, it will 2 times per second, it will change and will create a random value of between 0 and 90. So it's either not rotated or the maximum rotation would be 90 degrees. Okay, so that's a very simple expression. So you just have to type wiggle. The first thing is the frequency, how many times per second. So of course the larger the number is, the faster the values are changing. If you want to go like for every 2 seconds, that would mean that I would have to do 0.5. So if you do 0.5, I have to do it like this, 0.5. From now on, it's only every 2 seconds there is a different value, and it's of course rather slow in change. Let's stay here to 2 times per second. And the second one is the amplitude. So starting from the value that you have at the beginning value obviously is the beginning value of the rotation, and it will produce an animation that moves towards every, or rotates towards every value. Okay, so now what happens if I copy my shape, duplicate my shape layer? So I select shape layer, I hit Control D, and that will produce a second shape layer. Let me take the second shape layer and move it away a bit. So here's this one is the second. Let's take the first one and move it a little bit to the side. So the 2 shape layers have the same wiggle command. So they both have wiggle to 90. But if I hit play, you'll notice that they get 2 different movements. Why? Because they both produce 2 different random numbers. Those random values for wiggle will be generated from the position of the layer. So as soon as something is happening on a new layer, a new wiggle on a new layer, you will get a different random number. Is that kind of clear? So when we have everything on a different layer, is of course different. How can I make these 2 wiggles the same? For example, I could tell layer 2, in this case layer 2 is, let me fix that. I'm going to put shape 2, layer 2 at layer 2, so now it's right. So if I want layer 2 to be the same movement as layer 1, of course I could take the rotation and link it to this rotation, but in this case I just want to make the random numbers the same, and all I need to do is I go to the random to layer 2, find the wiggle, here it is, rotation express, and I'm going to add to the wiggle, which produces the random number, I'm going to tell him to use the same starting point for the random number as layer 1, and that is called seedRandom 0. So it's called seedRandom, and then you type which layer. Oh, sorry, not 0, 1. So layer 1. Layer 1 is the number that I want to have, and then you need a semicolon between those 2. So I told layer 2 that it should take the same random seed as layer 1. So now, when I move it, is it? Oh, I think it really is 0. Layer 1 is actually 0, I think. Let me get that. Oops, not like this. Yes, now you see. So layer 1 is 0. It's in an array. It's the first one is 0. So it's 0, and you could do the same. You could add the same seedRandom 100, and then also give the other layer seedRandom 100. It just has to be the same, and the first one usually starts with 0. So here it is. Now they both have the same random seed. Layer 1 has C0, and layer 2 I gave it by hand, and now you can see they do the same random movement. So it's not really random, it's always based on some kind of start value. Okay? If you want to place the wiggle command, the wiggle expression onto a value that has, for example, X and Y values, then it's a little bit more complicated. And actually, I'm not that big in scripting and so on. But for example, let's turn those off, and I'm going to create another little rectangle here in the middle. And for example, position. If I take a look at position, position usually has an X and a Y value. If I just do an Alt+Click on position, and I give it a wiggle, and let's say again 2 times per second. This time it's pixels, so I'm going to do 200 pixels. So a random movement of 200 pixels. If I do this now and I move it, you can see it will move in both directions at the same time. So it will produce a random value for both X and Y. And for example, if you don't want this, if you just want to have, if you just want to, for example, only do it in the Y-axis, for example, up and down, you have to do a little bit more. You have to separate the X and Y movement for using 2 variables. Here is, I have prepared a little script or a little expression that does this. So let me quickly paste this. So I set the first variable 1 is a value, and the second one gets the random factor. It right now 5 times per second, maybe not 5 times per second, it's too fast. 2 times per second, and I'll do 300 pixels. A little bit more movement. So now you can see while the X-axis stays the same value, the Y, so the first is the X and the second the Y, the second one will be wiggled. Okay, and then you put it into an array of variable 1 and the next one and the second one variable 2. So that will produce only a random value for one value. Of course, if you want to do the same thing, a random for both of them, then you can also put the wiggle here instead of value. Okay, so this is the command. I'm also going to put the text or the scripts that I'm writing here down in the description of the video. Okay, so the next thing is that is something a little interesting for randomness of text. Let me quickly close this. For example, if you have a piece of text that you put over here, and I'm just typing something so that I have an idea how big the font is. It's a little too big. Let's go for 100. So where is the content of the text? The content of the text can be found here in the text source text. So the source text here is actually what is written in the text piece of text. And here is a stopwatch, so the source can also be animated. So I can also use Alt+Click and add an expression. And the expression that I would like to show you here is a very simple one, and that is time. So the expression time. So from now on, the text will show what time it is, and the time basically is running in seconds. So 1 would be, here you can see it's 1 second. Let me take it to 10 seconds here, and you see 10. So here it is counting up the time. This time here can also be multiplied or divided. If you want the time to run slower, you can say time divided by 10, for example. Then I will have, you see the number that is running divided by 10. So in 10 seconds we will reach 1. So that's a simple way to create a counter of some kind. Okay? So you can divide it, you can multiply it, and so on. Something that is also interesting, for the source text, let me quickly close that again. So I just clicked again on the stopwatch, and now the expression is gone. Something that is also interesting as a text is, let me get back the shape layer, the animation I did before. So here in this shape layer, where we basically wiggled the rotation of our object. So the rotation has a wiggle. For example, how can I display what is the current angle of my object? So let me find this here. Down there is the rectangle transform rotation. So here's my rotation, which I added wiggle 2 times per second, 90 degrees. So how can I display what is shown? That is simple with the source text, and you can use the pick whip at the end of the source text. You take the pick whip and drag it down to the rotation. So it is kind of reading out the rotation as it automatically generates the rotation angle. It shows the random angle over here. If you now say, wait a second, I have, let me move that a little bit. Why do I need 12 digits after the comma for a rotation? That is just the kind of preciseness of the value that has been created here in the random rotation. You can also tell, for example, the angle that it should be, use the decimal number into an integer. So get rid of all the numbers after the comma. So, for example, it's called math round. So let's go up here. What is the expression that actually is creating the source text? So here's the expression, the source text, and you can see that the source text actually gets its value from this composition that we use right now, from the shape layer 1. It's the one that we used as a pick whip, shape layer 1, and it uses transform rotation. If you take all this, put it in brackets, so here and here, and right in the front, math round. It is the capital letters are important, so you have to use capital letter math and dot round. And in brackets, whatever value will be rounded. So now, if I move it, you can see, so math round, and then put whatever value should be turned into an integer in brackets. So now if I move it, I can only see what's before the comma. Okay, that's the math round. So very general math round, and then in brackets and it drops the decimal and returns what's in front of the comma. Okay, so you can do that with all kinds of values. Then something else. So that is this one. Let me turn this turn it invisible again. Let's do something else, and that is another text element. Here's another piece of text, and you saw it in the Iron Man video, and also maybe a little bit in the old-fashioned Terminator didn't use any randomly running numbers. You can create a random number here. The random number, again, I just type any text, so just something. Then I open the text layer and find the text, the source text, hit Alt+Click on the stopwatch in order to type in my own expression. And the expression that I'm using is random, and in brackets, for example, 0,10. That will produce a random number between 0 and 10. So, and you can see that every frame it produces a new random number. So you can use that also together with math round. So if I type math round in front, math dot round, and then random 0,10, that will produce a random number, but only before the comma. So you skip all the numbers after the comma. Okay, that is random, and in brackets the two number between A, comma, and B. Again, in the description down below, I'm going to type the text for you guys to copy. Okay, another animation, another expression that I really like is the following. If you animate something by hand, for example, let me get a simple, I'm not going to use a rectangle. I'm going to create a new solid. I rather like the solids instead of the shape layer. So here's my, let's make it comp size, and it's a pink layer. And this layer now I'm going to mask with a rectangle, or maybe use a rectangle with a rounded edges. So like this. So here's a simple object there. And now this object I'm going to animate by hand for maybe 2 or 4 seconds. So I'm just doing position, that is simple. So I'm going to set my new one, hit P for position, and I'm going to animate it by hand. Animate. And now let's start here. Let's go to 1 second there, 2 seconds there, 3 seconds there, and 4 seconds here. Okay, so a very simple animation by hand. And now here is the expression. Now if I take my already animated object and I open Alt and open the position, and now instead of transform position, what I'm going to add is I'm going to add an expression that makes sure that the animation that I did is repeated all the way till the end of the composition. So it kind of, as soon as you animate a little bit, it takes this animation and loops it out all the way to the end. It's called loop out. Loop out. And in brackets, cycle. Don't ask me who came up with this names. Loop out cycle. And now if I take my animation back to the beginning, choose my preview here and hit play, you can see this is my animation done by hand. And after this, it will continue to do it over and over. Okay? If you make sure that the animation has the same start point as end point, then it also looks like a loop. Mine makes this M shape and then jumps back to the beginning. Okay, so you don't need to animate it all the time. If it's just a blinking object or something is doing a movement, you do it once and then you use the expression loop out cycle, and that will repeat whatever animation you have applied to the specific value and will loop it till the end of the composition. Okay, the next expression, or it's actually not an expression, I guess. It's a simple trick to animate a value, a certain value, and we use the effect, or we use a slider control effect. Let's do, turn off my animated object here, and let's do again something else. Maybe take the, I'm going to do a simple object, a rectangle here again. Oh, no, let's do something else. I'm not going to do a rectangle, but like an arrow like this, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to place a slider control onto the layer. And the slider control, you can see it over here. You can open it up. It's an effect. And right now, the slider does nothing. Here's a simple slider. When you go further down, you can see effects. And here is the slider control. And basically what you can do is you can take the slider control and link it to something else. So I wouldn't, the slider control can actually be placed on any object. You don't need to place it on the object that you are animating, for example. So you can place it on a dummy, on a solid, or on whatever you want. The effect So you are actually not animating the, for example, rotation of an object, but you're animating the slider, and the slider transfers the animation onto the rotation in this case. So let's take the rotation of this layer. So I'm going to take my slider here, and the slider can also be placed an expression or be animated, and it also has a pick whip, so it can take its value and oh, sorry, it's the other way around, of course. I want the rotation to follow what the slider says. So here's my rotation. I take the pick whip of the rotation and say, okay, follow the slider. So now the rotation here is no more animated by the rotation value itself, but by the slider. And when you rotate the slider, then obviously you're creating values between 0 and 100. Of course, you can also take the slider control. It's just a Alt+Click on rotation. It takes. You can also like divide it or multiply it by 10 if the slider is not fast enough and so on. So you can. That is a simple thing to do. So pick whip onto the slider, and then the slider here regulates or adjusts the rotation. Can be placed on all kinds of values here. The next thing that I would like to show you is actually now we're not having expressions anymore. If you have a text element, we need a text element again, and let's find the text, and you may have seen that before. For example, somebody is trying to break into a certain a locked door, and the door has a display with a code on it, or you have to type in, I don't know, a 6-digit PIN code. Then you will have the PIN code that is the PIN or the password. For example, the password is password. So password. That is the right one, and you've seen that a kind of randomization tries different passwords and then at the end ends up with the correct one with password, and that is called character offset. A very simple effect, and then you can add it to your text here. So you open. Here's password, and you can see text, and right next to text here's an animate button, and with the animate button you can kind of have a drop down menu, and you can apply all kinds of things to your animation, to your text, and what I wanted to show you is character offset. And character offset is an effect that is an animation that I added to my text, and the character offset has a number and which can be animated. When it's 0, the word is as it is, and as soon as it's not 0, you have a different time. The only problem is I used a font style that is not really working with this. So let me animate my character offset, make it 10, then I hit animate, and I go ahead 6 seconds, and at 6 seconds I'm going to make it 0. So it kind of finds random words till it ends up with password. It's not random actually, it's an offset of the character. So what was an A was a B before, was a B is an A before, if it was a C then was a B, and then before an A. So it kind of offsetting in a certain direction. I don't know if it goes, you can try probably left or right. So now if I hit here run, you can see what I mean. It's producing a random number. How many numbers? And the last one is password. So I have 10, an offset of 10, and it starts with an offset of 10, and here's the offset of 0 where it reaches the right word. So just add the character offset here, and it allows you to add a certain object. Okay, the next one is something that I also like quite a lot to get a simple effect, and that is, so I already have a lot of layers, maybe later turn them all on. I'm going to do a very simple geometric shape. In this case, I'm going to use a rounded rectangle. I have no layer selected, so it will be another shape layer. Should look like this. And I am going to, I'm not going to use a stroke, but I'm going to fill it with a certain color, and actually no stroke. If you want to change that into, see right now it has a filling color and a stroke color. If I want to change the stroke color that it has no stroke, I can either do a 0 pixel stroke, or I can use Alt and click on it till I have the one with the red line. That means no stroke. I also can do the same with fill. So Alt+Click turns it from solid color into a gradient, into a radial gradient, and no filling. And then one more time, it's a color with Alt+Click on those buttons up here. So okay, so here's one. Here's a simple object, and what I'm doing is I'm now adding to my content. So here's the shape layer, and it has a content, a rectangle. Here is an add. Before we had the text, we had the animate. Now we have the add, and what we're going to add here is I'm going to add a, where is it here? Repeater. A repeater basically creates an array of multiple objects. So I'm going to do a repeater here. And the repeater that I just added, so let me find where it is, all the way down here. It says repeater. It creates 3 copies with a certain offset. Of course, the offset is how far it goes. And no, sorry, the offset is stays at 0. It's not the offset, here's the transform. The repeater has an extra transform, and here is, for example, how far it goes. So let me take position 0 is x is 0, and y is, so just that it looks like 3 different things. So with this value, I can simply, with the repeater, I can simply create, I don't know, 5 copies or so in order to to get the same object. The fun with this repeater is that you can actually animate the amount of copies, and you can use that for something for a few simple animations. So let me do an example where we combine all the things that we did so far. Let me go into a new composition here. So I could, of course, keep on in comp 1. I am simply doing a new composition. New composition, call it comp 2. It's the same thing, only we now have no layers there. So, sorry. So in the new composition, I'm going to create, the first thing is I'm going to create a kind of display. Let's start with a new solid. The new solid, let's make it a little bit more colorful. Let's go for a colorful orange. And now let's take it and use a simple pen tool. It's selected here, so it means I draw a mask, what I did before. So, like a little arrow. And when I now rotate my solid, rotation, you can see it rotates like a little arrow here. Good. So now the first thing is I would like to take my rotation. It can go 90 degrees in both ways. Let's do a wiggle and let's let the arrow randomly rotate. Let's move it maybe a little bit further down. So that is the rotation. I take the whole layer, hit R, rotation, then I use an Alt-Click on the stopwatch that opens up the type in for the expression, and my expression for the rotation will be wiggle, let's do 2 times per second, and we can go all the way to 90 degrees. If I type 90 degrees, it actually will create will go both ways. So it's plus minus 90. It's it's the amplitude that goes both ways. Okay, so here's my random, maybe not 2 times per second, that will, because we need time to look at all the other things on screen. Let's do 1 time per second. Every second we get a new number, so that's what my arrow will look like, kind of display some kind of thing. We can type in, 0 degrees or whatever. So the next thing is, I would like to display a text that not only, the wiggle not only rotates my little hand here of my clock or whatever display, but I also have a text piece that is giving me the number down here as a text without commas. So basically I just need a piece of text. Let's also make it orange. And I just type somewhere, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to use a center alignment. It's not the character, it's the paragraph. Here it is, center, yes. And the text information, the text source, I'm going to open. Here's text and text source. The text source, I'm going to use the pick whip here and say you should show the current rotation. Open up the source text, and I'm going to use a math round in order to get rid of all the numbers here in the back. So that's math dot round, and in brackets all this. So now my text is like this. Okay, minus, yes, it works. So the next thing is, I would like to have, whenever the hand is on one side, it should, now I have to try that. Whenever the hand is, the rotation angle is, for example, 67 degrees, then I would like to have a little bar going up and down, for example, to have 6.7 copies. I'm going to try how that could work. So I'm going to create a little graphic element. Here is again the one I did before, with a rectangle tool. Oh, sorry. I had my text element selected. Whenever you use one of those graphic elements, you have to make sure either you have a layer selected, then it's a mask. If you select nothing, then it's a shape layer. I want a shape layer this time. So here it is, a shape layer. Do you see how every time I add another layer, that the random number of my rotation changes? Yes, because the random number that is here in the wiggle depends on which layer it is, and it's the bottom one. So every time I add a new one on top, it gets a different number. So here it is, and my shape layer. Let's make it. Oh, sorry. I was looking for not the text. I'm going to do another. It's not the same. I should have picked a specific orange. Now I'm going to use an add repeater, and the repeater one transform repeater. I don't want this to be 0, but I want it to go up. So like this. And how can I get the amount of copies? The amount of copies, here's the copies, and there's also a pick whip. So instead of animating the copies by hand, I could say let's take the amount, for example, from the rotation here, the rotation angle, or you could also use it from the text source, but the best way is to use it from the rotation. So I'm going to use my pick whip amount of copies and go all the way to the yellow solid. I should have opened it, sorry. That is, now the list is getting too small. Here's the yellow solid, and here's the rotation. Good. So my copies here will pick my rotation angle. There it is. Maybe the rotation, yes, copies. Maybe the rotation angle, everything divided by, let's divide it by 10, huh? Let's try that. So instead, when it's 14 degrees, I don't want 14 copies. Minus doesn't work anyway. So here it is, and every time it goes to, let's go for not divided by 10, let's only do 5. So divided by 5, that we have a little bit more here. Good. And now I'm going to add the same here, also on the other side, only for the negative values. And therefore, I just take my whole shape layer here and duplicate it. The duplicate I'm going to move over here. How can I, and now it's doing the same thing, of course, it's reading out the number. How can I make it negative? By simply looking the value it gets, and if I have a negative value, it's not doing anything because now we get negative copies. So all I need to do is, on the duplicate, I have to make the amount of copies negative, which means it turns the negative value in a positive and it will show up again. So here is my transformation, my content rectangle. Where is my repeater? Here, repeater 1. Here's my copies. And this copies here, again, is looking for the rotation of the other one, only, let's try this, I'm not sure if it works, minus at the beginning. Let's try that. Yes, see? Now, when the value goes into the negative, it will show up on the left side, and then the other one will show up on the right side. Okay, so that is a very simple thing where we combined all kinds of animations, both all kinds of expressions. So we got the wiggle of the hand of the display. Then we got the number, which reads out the rotation here and uses a math round to get rid of all the digits after the comma. And then we have a repeater here that uses the rotation but divided by 5. So we got 25. That means we have 5 copies of this bar. And when we copied it, the negative one didn't show up because negative will not produce a result. So that's why I took the repeater value and basically set a minus in the front. And now I get both on both sides. Okay, so I think there was a nice overview of the possibilities of expressions. I hope you liked it. Thanks for your attention. My name is Arnold Faller, and I'll see you in the next one.